Good morning and welcome to the Common Hour. My name is Justin Hopkins and I am the Acting Director of the Writing Center and Senior Teaching Professor of English. I'd like to introduce our ASL interpreter, Emily Phipps. Thank you, Emily, for interpreting for us today at Common Hour. Please note that if you need to change your screen view to include Emily as you watch, you can adjust the screen display mode in the small box labeled View towards the upper right of the Zoom window. You can enable closed captioning if you'd like. A very warm welcome to all for our first Common Hour of this semester. Common Hour is an unique and inclusive program that brings the Franklin and Marshall College community together weekly during the academic year for culturally and intellectually enriching events. It is the only regularly scheduled event that unites students, faculty, and staff and invites the larger community to join us. Throughout the pandemic, the Common Hour has continued to provide a virtual gathering space and a source of inspiration, education, and compelling discussion for the F&M community and beyond. We hope you will join us during Common Hour next week for the recipient of the 2021 Bradley R. Dewey Award, Professor Dan Ardia's 2022 Darwin Day lecture titled How Animals Respond to a Changing Environment, a Global and Local Perspective. Please follow Common Hour on our webpage, the President's Events calendar, and our F&M Common Hour Facebook and Instagram pages. During today's event, Zoom viewers can submit questions for our speaker via the Q&A feature. Please indicate your affiliation with the college, but we don't need your name. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the proposer of this event, Nadra Ebouche, Chair of the Africana Studies Program and Associate Professor of French. Oh, Nadra.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it. Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm delighted to introduce this week's Common Hour speaker, Luther Hughes, all the more so given that this week is the first week of Black History Month. But before I do so, I would like to extend my gratitude to our co-sponsors who helped make this event possible. The Africana Studies Program, the Center for Liberal Arts and Society, the Department of English, the Humanities Initiative, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Office of LGBTQ+ Student Life, and the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Program. Today, it is my privilege to introduce Luther Hughes, author of the debut poetry collection, A Shiver in the Leaves, forthcoming from BOA Editions in 2022, and the chapbook, Touched, published in 2018 by Sibling Rivalry Press, recommended by the American Library Association. Luther is the founder of Shade Literary Arts, a literary organization for queer writers of color, and co-hosts the Poet Salon podcast with Gabrielle Bates and Duji Tahat. Recipient of the Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship and 92Y Discovery Poetry Prize, and current Kaveh Fellow, his writing has been published in American Poetry Review, Paris Review, Seattle Times, Orion Magazine, Poetry Northwest, Hayden's Ferry Review, and more. Over the past several years, he has taught and lectured at various colleges and universities, including Washington University in St. Louis, where he received his MFA in writing. Former editor at The Offing, Yes Yes Books, Frontier Poetry, and Columbia Poetry Review, he curates a monthly poetry newsletter called Loose Poetry Hour. Luther currently lives in Seattle, where he was born and raised. Today, Luther is going to read poems from his chapbook Touched, a book interrogating and mediating on sexual abuse, violence, and the ways in which our trauma follows us, and his forthcoming collection of poems, A Shiver in the Leaves. Nestled against the backdrop of Seattle's flora, fauna, and cityscape, A Shiver in the Leaves wrestles with the interior and exterior symbiosis of a gay Black man, using love and desire to escape the threat of death and depression. And with that, I am pleased to introduce Luther Hughes.
Thank you, Nadra. Hey, I'm going to start with some music by Nina Simone. And this this lyric is the opening to my Chappy Chap touch, and so I feel like it was necessary for me to start all off with this music.
Why you wanna fly, blackbird? You ain't ever gonna fly. No place big enough for holding all the tears you're gonna cry. Cause your mama's name was lonely and your daddy's name was pain. And they call you little sorrow, cause you'll never love again. So why you wanna fly, blackbird? You ain't ever gonna fly. You ain't got no one to hold you. You ain't got no one to care. If you'd only understand, dear, nobody wants you anywhere. So why you wanna fly, blackbird?
How we forget after Lois Gallo. I forgot I had skin, forgot what happens to bones when they are swamped in sin, bed sheets. I forgot about the bed sheets, forgot the nights he buried my name with his fists, forgot I had fists too, forgot I had lips to scream. I have forgotten how to scream, forgotten how to pray, didn't forget I was his prey, forgot to feel ashamed, forgot what I looked like in the mirror, forgot that my eyes matched my skin. If only I remembered my skin. I forgot to blink, to breathe in between the minutes, forgot I had lungs to inhale, forgot how to inhale, didn't forget I had holes. Didn't forget humans are made of holes, forgot we all end up in holes. Did I mention my skin? Still no memory of what skin looks like wrapped in soil, forgot skin soils. I forgot myself and the language of sorry and stop and no and don't and please, forgot where I go when I die. Is it heaven or my backyard? Forgot that black fades after a while, forgot humans fade too. Sometimes we are left to wear the words of others to keep from committing suicide. I forgot how to commit suicide. Is it before or after the bed sheets? Should I wait before or after the end? So like Nadra beautifully introduced, this is a chapbook dealing with trauma, sexual abuse, racial trauma and abuse, and how that trauma sort of follows you um, throughout your life. And so I'll be reading some poems from here, then I'll switch over to the poems from the full length. I do like we're in like a, like a college setting, and like, it feels all very like, I can't really say anything. But the chat is there for like, something. And so like, if you feel inclined to be like, oh my God, or wow, or woo, or like something, feel free. Like, it's a pandemic, we're all virtual. And so like any type of pseudo interaction would be lovely. So yeah, I'm going to keep going. This next poem starts off with a scripture from Genesis 4:9. That scripture is, and the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? Offering. 1. At the end of the day, agony is a mouth. In the mirror, I watch the mouth shiver. If it's not the warmth of knowing, then it's nothing. Hear me. I was taken to the basement. There was a couch I slid between, then darkness. Outside of me, my brother marveled at my inner workings. The porous moon stumbled into the sliding doors, covered. He plunged till he couldn't. Stiff sounds of flesh smacking flesh. I imagined how blood responded to intrusion, the static dance, and then I didn't. Ache became the bones' framework. You severed the house, the city. I ruined commands. Stop. Ouch. My brother was hypnotized, powerless to curiosity. As night cleaved, so did he, catching a new wind, watching skin have who to slur. I don't know. But lovers have asked about bruises left when it was over. The couch, still a couch. The basement learned me. I'm still taken. I have a mirror too. When the snake sewn to your hips hummed a head of glass inside me, I refused. The reptile begged to braid the vessel, become breath before the blood spread. Relax, you said. Breathe. I relaxed. I counted the clock with the hymn. No weapons formed against me shall prosper. You flowered the room with my lungs, flung me into the couch, to the walls against the fireplace. I own you. You made me hear it. Own with a knuckles belted cry. It roiled from your lips as panic spilled moths from forget it. This was your love. If not the body, then the blood. If not the blood, pray alone in the cold basement. Let me start over. When finished, I absorbed the remains held between organs. You left not telling tomorrow how to mend the brown skin once torn. I'll read 2 more from the chapbook. Um, this next poem. So I was like really obsessed with crows, like really obsessed with crows. I low-key still am, but obsessions have to die and evolve in some ways. And so this poem that I'm reading next, and a few poems probably I'm going to read today, we're going to have crows in it. And so all that to say, love crows, feed your crows, acknowledge your crows, all the good stuff. Tenderness. When the festival was over, I watched the crows pluck the earth until sour. I wavered, nestled the scene inside the contour of my eyes. I wasn't a violent person. Had I been, had my feet desired the reverb of the fowl's hollow, I would have fled. Instead, I write my brother's forced sex. Relax, in italics. Being a beast of craft, I grew ill, gave my earth to a man with no parade in his body. It didn't matter. The man clipped my pelvis at the smile, searched for the muscle. A familiar rummaging. Outside his bedroom window, perched atop a pine tree, my brother watched. The jailed under pink exposed, the swift choke flattening the neck, the flourishing of him, him, him. How wild to watch an animal die. Do nothing. When I speak of cruelty, I mean do nothing, I confess. I craved my brother gutted. Let me take the crow's tooth black, bury it. Okay, one last one from the Chappy Chap. Alternate ending with weeping. But I'm human. I repeat it, finally, without him inside me. This open space where once was skin, was a pulled back shirt, was hands combing. Behind there was a backyard of things I couldn't tell you now. I'm sorry. I'm sure he was good. He said it sometimes when kissing, but without actually saying. He would force a bend from me, a degree to which meant welcome. I didn't know then. If anything, I was twinned at the mouth. It was slender. Beside me, an empty fireplace. That abyss growing less happy. You have heard it before. Relax. Relax? I instructed nothing of limbs, legs, arms, unballed fists. I had to expand from the inside, be brighter. A half split window to dawn's rituals, sunlight knitting the basket of trees, winnows, the melodies sitting on the sill, a man reading on the front lawn across the street. So yeah, that's touched. As you can see from the poems I read, it is really obsessed with sexual trauma and abuse. And so it's my little guy there. So I'm going to transition into reading from the book. And again, the book that I'm going to be reading from is a forthcoming book, my debut book called A Shiver in the Leaves, which will be out from Boa Edition in September. And before that, or while I read this poem, I'm going to share a picture in which the poem I'm reading is after. And you guessed it, it is about crows. And so here is this picture. This picture is called Tenor. It's by Jean-Michel Basquiat. And this poem I am reading is after Jean-Michel Basquiat. Tenor, after Jean-Michel Basquiat. Crows and more crows. One crow with a rat hanging from its beak. Another crow with its wings plucked empty. I wanted so much of today to be peaceful, but the empty crow untethers something in me, a feral yearning for love that is so full of power, of tenderness. The words fall to their knees, begging for mercy like tulips in wind. I don't wear the crown, for the time's power has tainted my body, but I can tell the difference between giving up and giving in. If you can't, ask the crow that watches me through the window laughing as I drink my third bottle of wine. Ask the sound the tree makes when the crow has grown disgusted with my whining. After years of repression, I can come clean. I was a boy with the hole other boys stuffed themselves into. I have wanted nothing to do with blackness or laughter or my life, but about love. Who owns the right, really? Who owns the crow who loves fresh meat or the crow who loves the vibration of its own throat? Everything around me is black for its own good. The widow, the picture of the boy crying on the wall, the mirror with its taunting, the crows that belong to their scripture. Can you imagine being so tied to blackness, even your wings cannot help you escape? About my life, every needle, a small prayer, every pill, a funeral hymn. I wanted the end several times, but thought, who owns this body really? God, dirt, the silly insects that will feast on my decay? Is it the boy who entered first, or the boy who wanted everything to last? And so this book that's coming out later this year, as Nadra again wonderfully introduced, is about depression and about love and about intimacy and about Seattle, and about being in a city that holds so much of my own trauma, given I grew up in Seattle and from Seattle and moving back to Seattle after some years. And I don't know if people have been to Seattle or people just hear like, it rains so much. Oh my gosh. It does rain quite a bit, but it's mostly overcast. It rains in Portland more than Seattle. But given Seattle's its flora, it being so lush and green, it's also kind of housed in big cityscape. And so you get both the city life while also kind of that flora and fauna life. And so the book also wrestles with that duality, um, with the duality of the tension of love and depression. And so these poems reflect that I'm reading today for you all. There will be morning, election night 2016. Excuse me. I'm taking too long. I'm at a bar, ignoring my friend's call. I take another shot, a pill, a drag of a man's cigarette out front. He smacks my ass. Cue the war on everything. A white man shrieks. I pray to a God who has no eyesight. Drink myself plumb for nerves to numb. Someone chucks a glass of tequila into a wall. I go home, cry into my roommate's lap. My mother calls to tell me a woman from church has died. You know her, she says. Knew, I correct. Sometimes I react to things I never touched. Behind the dumpster, a man tries to fuck some feeling into me. Blue, where it matters. I want my roommate to change the channel. He asks why if nothing will change. The man I poured myself into, I can't stop. Blame the black in me. I feed off the recognition. The first step in cleaning is to recognize the infection. This book is also about a lot of things, obviously, but also deals with family relations. And I should say, when I say love is in the book, I really do mean love broadly. I do mean intimate love and the beloved, but I also mean family love. I also mean love of the city, and also mean love of the mother and the father. And so, when you think of love, think of it more broadly in more broad strokes. And so, this next poem um, is about my mother. My mother, my mother. When I was a child, I would run through the backyard while my father yanked dandelions, daisies, thistles, crabgrass, mowed, rearranged the stones around the porch. The task of men, though I didn't know. Blushed with cartoons and chocolate milk one Saturday, I found a bee working a dandelion for its treasure the way only God's creatures can, giving and giving until all that is left is the act itself. And there's faith too. My mother used to say in her magnolia lilt, it comes, there's a road to follow. When I swat the bee away from its fortune, my father, knee drenched in manhood, grins, and his gold tooth glistens a likely tale. And when the bee stings my ear, I run to him screaming as my mother runs outside, hearing her only child's voice peel back the wallpaper. She charms my ear with kisses. This afternoon, I notice a bee trapped inside the window as my mother on the phone tries to steal her voice to say her mother has died. I wonder if he can taste the sadness the man on TV tells the other. The bee is so calm. The room enlists a fresh haunting, and the door frame distracts. To believe her when she says, as the bouquet of yellow roses on the dresser bows its head and the angles of my clay bloom with fire, it'll be okay. It's my duty as her son. My mother sits in the hospital in San Antonio, motherless. My mother is now a mother without the longest love she's ever known. My mother, who used to wake up before the slap of sunrise with my father to build new rooftops. My mother, who wrote, I pray you have a great day on stupid notes tucked in my lunchbox. My mother, who told the white woman in Ross to apologize for bumping into me as I knocked over a rack of pantyhose. My mother, who cried in SeaTac Airport as I walked through customs, yesing the woman who asked, is it his first time moving away from home? My mother, who looks at me with glinted simper when the pastor spouts disobedient children. My mother, who was told at a young age she'd never give birth, barren as she were. My mother, my mother. What rises inside me, I imagine inside her, although I've never had a mother leave this earth. I've never been without love. I have a few more poems to read for y'all. Um, yes, cool. Prayer. After many years away, Seattle is everywhere. The fresh faces of the evergreens, crows that kiss the sky. I was once the sky. I ran over the hills of my body with the son of a man who killed himself. I've been thinking about what suicide means. My friend says there are ways to commit without dying. There's joy in that. I ask myself, do you really want to die this far away from your hometown? I don't want to die. I mean, it's too beautiful this summer and I want to see another like it. The bluebells, the cardinals. This morning, my mother called again to say she loves me. I was annoyed, I admit it. I think she is dying, but doesn't want to say. The last time I saw her, she was limping. She didn't think I noticed her face sinking into her skull. Still beautiful, flush. When she hung up, I opened the blinds. I want to die with the city pouring onto my deathbed, to the floor, then out into the hallway and into another room where it can lay its head on the pillows of others, unbound by my bullshit. Have you ever seen more than one cardinal at once? I've Googled it. Are cardinals lonely birds? I know what you're thinking. Yes, I miss Seattle. I miss my mother. I miss my father. I never call. Last night, I dreamt my father and I stayed up all night watching his grandson do backbends, cry, and laugh. Long black hair swooped into a bun. My father is alive. Did you know? Sometimes I talk about him as if he has died. When the man killed himself, what was he thinking? When people jumped out of the World Trade Center, red from the combustion, cardinals, lonely wings, never mind. I don't want to go there. I'm always trying to escape too many places at once, flying out of a cage and into another. I'm going to keep going. Yeah, I'm going to keep going. Prayer. Oh, no, sorry. Just kidding. Just read that for you all. Passed down to my father. You see him dead now, you said. Her and her dead too. Your face, so unchanged in the year of rain. It wasn't the year I loved a man with a head bald like yours, but after. Summer, I worked in Puget Sound and you were happy I was home. The city told me best. Your grandfather is dead. Since you have the same name too, it's safe to assume part of you is dead also. The living room never settled so kindly. On the walls, pictures of your new children who later that year refused to buy your pills. You cried on the phone to me. Sorry. The year of crying, the year of cracking into men and the men ridding themselves. I have the same name too. The year of collective dying. What I thought was mine belonged to you first. To think otherwise was foolish of me. When your father died, the crows sorrowed, the sky and the field lost its green heart. It was out the blue, you showing me the old photo, digging it out from a box beneath the TV. You look like him. A man told me, meaning my grandfather, meaning already faded, a sapped star. He clothed me carefully like a tradition, like a bitter chain passed down through generations. Forgive me for the meaning I make of this. You gave me a chain with your father's gold ring. It broke. I never told you. Forgive me for being careless with your mourning. Forgive my bones, my healthy little animals for bringing his face into your house. I'm glad my dad got us out of Mississippi, you said, voice sprouting for the first time after months of surgeries. I sat, picture in hand, eyeing all the dead smiles the ground has grown tired of. The year of extreme heat, you said. You opened the back door and the city, being merciful, gifted a breeze. So 3 more poems. This next poem I'm reading is sort of like a reprise of a poem in the chat book that I didn't read for y'all purposely. But this poem is sort of a callback to that poem. Black Boy Revisited. You Google Tamir Rice. Google says, people also ask, who killed John Crawford? Where was Michael Brown shot in Ferguson, Missouri? When was Jamar Clark shot? Who is Oscar Grant? Who are the officers involved in the Freddie Gray case? You take a picture of your face. You sleep recklessly. The church prays for your deliverance. You turn the corner like any maggot turns in a graveyard. You're only a matter of time. Who killed Luther Hughes? Where was Luther Hughes shot in Seattle, Washington? When was Luther Hughes shot? Who is Luther Hughes? Who are the officers involved in the Luther Hughes case? The hole in your head is like any old hole, you tell yourself. A man slides in, any old hole you remember. You watch the news, you tweet. Your cell phone dies before you send the picture. You're not like them others, you whisper in his ear. You're alive. You're not Tamir or John or Michael or Jamar or Oscar or Freddie. Look how God shows you his grace when you breathe, heave when being run through. You count to 3 before clicking the article. Tamir Rice shooting, a breakdown of the events that led to the 12-year-old's death. A video. Tamir, police car, policemen, guns pulled, altercation, gunshots, dead. All heavens are for Black boys. All will be heaven for Black boys. Black boy heaven for all, for all. Black heaven. Will the Black boy go? Will he heaven? Will heaven be a Black boy? Boy be Black in heaven. All boys that are Black will heaven. Heaven will be Black for all Black boys. Let heaven be in every Black boy. Black boys take heaven wherever they go, wherever you go. Black heaven. Heaven goes wherever you heaven. You go to heaven. Black boy, all your Black boys will heaven. All Black boys want heaven. All boys Black for heaven, for heaven. A will for boys, a will for Black boys is heaven. It's the middle of death season. You live with dead bodies because you keep searching for them. You take turns with yourself. Imagine what coffin they'll lay you in. Mahogany, marble. You think love couples with violence. You visit a clinic to get rid of yourself. Before doctors, you had nothing but a history of names. Now you can add yourself, you think. A testament. Just this one pill, this one time. But it's not the end for you. Swear it. In case you're counting, I now have 2 poems left. I hope y'all are okay and all the things. It is February. Some odd stream of oak trees line the sidewalk like a phrase that never leaves the mind. I love you, or I have love for you. He kissed me this morning beneath the gray quilt of late winter like he loves me, and there's a difference in the work of nature today. Sometimes difference is simple, but today there's a woman at the bus stop screaming, I hate you, you fucking nigger. I watch as sunlight crumbles against Lake Washington, watch a bird that appears at first to be a raven, but with a subtle twitch of its blouse wing turns crow as it lands next to a puddle of trash. Is that woman angry or frustrated? There's a freckling of pigeons, tired of the leftover Starbucks. There's a man grabbing the ass of another looking at me as if I were a forest to be lost in. There's always a way hunger declares itself. Is that what it means to be Black in Seattle? Standing here admiring the rotting moan of car horns as if nothing were happening? The white man next to me looks at me and shakes his head, mouth shedding a smirk. A police car sirens a group of women not to cross, loud, red foul. If wondering, the woman is Black. Does that make a difference? On my phone, I read a caption that says, missed 2, but got 4. Next time they won't be so lucky, referencing 4 birds, each shot in the head or the unseemly breast. Does knowing the birds are American crows make a difference? There's smoke climbing out the sewer. There's a child laughing or crying. In the article beneath, 14-year-old George Steiny Jr. is killed by electric chair for being accused of murdering 2 white girls. His Blackness is never mentioned. This matters. It matters more than the shock crows, more than the woman who by now is so quiet, a city of her own. As I get on the bus, I wonder if she has a son. I want a son, which might be weird given I am newly in love, given that we are Black. Isn't it irresponsible to raise a child in this city of Mammoth Hills and Mount Rainier teething away at the sky? I think I will die before I get the privilege. Sometimes I slush through this city and feel like I have died already. I have one last poem for you all, and thank you all for just being here and just listening to these poems and listening to kind of the wrestling that I go through and thinking about some of these larger topics. And so I appreciate y'all for being here. Mercy. Peeking through the clouds, Mount Rainier, with its white tank top, several cities to glare upon and a moral blue sky to angle into, must love by now to be American. When asked this by the woman in front of us on the night President Obama was elected, my mother and I in Walmart, isn't it a great night to be American? The cashier just nodded, but my mother yelled, yes, it really is, thank God. And yes, it was a great night to be American there between the bags of Lay's and plague of batteries to be Black in America, thank God. But oh, mountainous beast, who am I to thank now, years later, walking home from the bus stop, surrounded by midwinter eaten trees and new rise condos, that my love wasn't shot by cops at work today, mistaken as someone else? Is there a song for this strain of mercy? At home, the light flickers above us as we sip wine, letting the TV wash our bodies into quiet laughter. I know we should spend this time spitting on the name of America how we usually do when another Black person has been killed or when another country perfumes with our war. But there's beauty unaccounted for tonight. There are crows out back, tired from the work of flights and pilgrimage, ashing the branches one by one. There is the crock pot of red beans in the kitchen, its chestnut chest bubbling with bay leaves and sausage. I fear I have made a mess of being an American. Love, I'm done with the fear of never doing enough. Is there anything else you want to say about what happened today? I ask him as he takes a spoonful of home into his mouth. The laugh track on TV peppers the room and he shakes his head. What did I expect? Him, Black like me, American like me, in love like me to say after dusting the day along to get inside this four-wall pasture amid the morning of dirty laundry, the painting of a cracked moon guarding the wooden black dresser. You like the food? He asks. Yes, I do, I say, and I kiss him on the cheek. Thank you. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Luther. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to share right off a comment. It's an anonymous comment, but it's certainly one that I can echo myself. Your imagery is powerful, evocative, and devastating. I can certainly agree with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question here from a professional staff member. I love that musical piece before the reading, I think referring to the Nina Simone piece. And then a question attached to that. The emotions in that first piece that you read are so real. From where do you draw your inspiration?
Thank you for that question. So I guess if I'm thinking of where I draw my emotion from or what inspires me to be, I guess, that vulnerable or intentional invulnerability, I guess it's a two-part answer. So one part is I grew up dancing, and so I'm used to expressing myself in certain ways that an audience can easily pick up on. And so for me, when I think of expression or to be vulnerable, I think of, my own body, what my body has been through and how my body can express certain elements of itself. And so, which is probably why my work is so bodily heavy and bodily focused, is because I grew up dancing. And so for me, allowing myself to be as vulnerable as say a dancer does on stage allows my audience to really understand what's happening emotionally and that expressing myself in those ways. And so that's kind of one part where I feel that connects and expressing myself in a vulnerable way. Another part is reading other poets who have done so, like Carl Phillips or Sharon Olds or Lucille Clifton, right? And so I feel like those poets, with a few other poets, have taught me what it means to be vulnerable on the page and to kind of have power in that vulnerability and allow myself to just go there and express myself in ways that are beneficial for my own healing and also possibly healing for the reader who's ever reading the poems, right? And so I want my poems to give courage to folks who are struggling with being vulnerable or struggle with similar things in their life. And so hopefully those things come across in a good way for people um, to be themselves and to also find the power in being vulnerable and expressing themselves in ways that are healing for themselves.
That's really fascinating. I felt like I could sense a kind of physicality in the poems, and I'm not surprised then that that comes from a background in dance and movement. There's a question here from a faculty member, which you've partially already addressed a bit, but perhaps you could say a bit more about how you moved from the dancing into the poetry. How did you first get started as a poet? This is a good question, when did you first call yourself a poet? And any advice that you could give to students or anyone who's working on their own poetry.
It's funny. So I don't remember not really ever writing poetry. Like I feel like I always wrote poetry growing up just because I don't know, I've always seen it around. And so I don't remember ever not writing poetry. I remember for sure the first time I thought poems can be different than what I was used to in school. I had heard the choir director at church read a poem about birds, kind of, which is kind of funny because now I write about birds too. And so I feel like that was the first time I was like, oh, poetry can do more than just be lovey-dovey or sappy. It can be broad approach to different elements and that can connect to your life in some way. And so I think that's what the first instance I was like, oh, I can write poetry like that. That's interesting. I was I think 12 or 11 years old, but I always grew up writing poetry. For the longest time, I thought I was going to be a fiction writer. I wrote a lot of short stories in middle school and high school, a lot, overbearingly. And of course, dancing, growing up, with everything. But I think I didn't know I could be a poet the way I am now until actually my early 20s. And so I went to community college. I was like, oh, I'm going to go to community college, get my little stuff in, and then be a journalist. And I hated journalism so much. I was like, this is not the type of writing I want to do at all. So I took a 2-year break and I was like, I need to just figure out what to do. And I came across my undergrad, Columbia College Chicago, and they had poetry as a major. And I was like, whoa, I've never seen that before. And so that was when I was 22, 23. And I was like, okay, this is when I'm going to say I'm a poet. I'm going to study poetry in this way and become a poet in these ways. And so that's when I really learned I could be a poet and wanted to be an actual poet. Um, so my advice, I guess, for folks who are working on poetry or wanting to be a poet is to just take that leap into studying poetry, whether academically, whether by yourself, whether that's, going to the library and just reading books of poetry, whether that's going to readings like this and listening to poets talk about poetry, whether that's, going to panels, reading craft books. I think it's just being intentional about studying a thing you want to do is the first step in doing that thing. And again, it doesn't have to be academically. It could be other aspects and other realms, right? Poetry is seen more than just in academic settings. But if you are, a current student and you're like, well, I don't know, take that first poetry class, take that intro to poetry class, take that, poetry workshop class and just kind of see what that looks like for you and just begin. And that's for anything in life, right? Like if you want to be a dancer, if you want to be a chef, an accountant, just begin and start doing that. And, it might not be always easy like everything else, but you can say you tried and then move from there. Um, and I'm always about intention. And so just, be intentional about how you want to do something. And if you want to study poetry or begin writing a book of poetry, then just start writing a book of poetry, and start working on that thing.
Makes sense. I have a question here and a comment from one of the poets on campus. Thank you so much, Luther Hughes. This person wants to be identified. So this is Professor Meg Day, professor of poetry, and many of my creative writing students are watching. I'm wondering if you might share with them how you make decisions about what to read at a reading, and if you imagine your poems to have different lives on and off the page.
Hi, Meg Day. So yes, how I make decisions on what I want to read is I think about the story I want to tell in the moment. And so I do create a sort of arc when I have readings. And so we can get from point A to point B. So it makes sense. And I also want to say I don't usually read poems in order the way they're ordered in the book or in a chapbook. And so for me, it becomes fun to create a new arc in a very intimate setting for poems and for people, because again, it's a different type of reading than it is for the book itself. And so I think, yes, I think because of that, they do live off the page in ways that for me is exciting and also surprising. Even what I read tonight, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I never thought, oh, I had these connections in this way. Will I reorder the book? Absolutely not, right? But however, they do live together in a certain way, in a certain conversation when they're ordered differently than what I have to be in the book. And that does allow, I think, for the poems to live off the page in necessary ways. Even from myself, I remember I was talking to Rick Barrett in an interview, who's a poet, phenomenal poet, genius, amazing. And he was like, even poets are readers of their own work, which is mind blowing, right? Because you're right. I may get a poem that I write and I read it differently than say someone else reads it. And doesn't mean we're both incorrect. We're both actually correct, because poems do live on outside of the body, outside of the person even writing it. And so for me, um, that's exciting. And I do think it does tell to the idea of poetry living outside of either the book or in a way. But yes, how I order poems is to make sure there's a narrative and an arc and a trajectory, which again surprises me every time I do it, and it feels very special, I think, and very intimate to the folks listening.
I'll jump the queue to just comment myself that I really enjoyed the use of the words mourning and whole and pray, and hearing those spoken aloud, and then the little mystery to me of, okay, which spelling and which use of the word is this? I really enjoyed that and admired that performance. We have a long question here from a faculty member. Some of your poems seem to be looking out at and describing the world through your own eyes. Others seem to be talking to yourself, describing what is all in your own mind and thought. Person says, I'm thinking of the Black Boy Heaven, oh so lyrical poem, thank you for that. Do you feel there is a difference in the way you compose these, a similar structure that pulls them together? I'd love to hear more about how your experience and thinking turn into the words that you've recited to us.
Thank you for that question. I think what I do is for myself, I tend to react to things. I'm very observant when it comes to the natural world around me. I like sitting by the window, just watching. I'm like a cat or something. Like sit by the window and watching things happen. In the car, like looking out the window. And so that, for me, that observing, that curious nature I have allows for me to talk about exteriority and what's around me and my environment around me. And so I think when I am in a poem or sit down to write a poem, I do want to do the world its due diligence, to talk about the world in the way it is and gesture towards the world around me, because I do find the world beautiful in different aspects. And so I do set out to describe my exterior purposely, because that's just kind of how I kind of react to things. And it is different than what I sit down and write a poem that's more interior, because my interior life, I think, is very, very lush and exuberant. And so I want to make sure that my interiority is also portrayed in a way that is honest And by saying less than exuberant, I just mean like I have a lot of wrestling inside me that I like go through and think about and like work through. And so I want to make sure that's its own thing in a way, up against or have tension against how I see the world. And so I think I see the world differently than possibly how my interior works, where I see the world always like being, working together in harmony and always like, honest and true and like lush and da da da. Versus my interior life is more wrestling and more reckoning. And I have to understand what that means in relation to my exterior. Because I am Black, because I am gay, because I do move through the world as a Black gay man, I don't always have the privilege to allow my perception of myself be the actual perception that's come upon me. And so I'm also wrestling with that nature, right? I'm wrestling with how others perceive me in relation to how I perceive myself and how I perceive the world. And so I think those become all blurred in some aspect too, especially in poems like Prayer, which I read about, it's about suicide, and my mother was in there, and then thinking about even cardinals, and ending with like the idea of like people in the World Trade Center. That's all blurred together because perceptions I have of myself, the world of the world, does blur sometimes, and so it's hard for me to write those poems separately. But to go back to the question, how I approach those poems, interior poems, exterior poems, I want to make sure again that interior has that wrestling and exterior has that observing nature and that like that lens towards beauty and appreciation. Hope that answers the question. I feel like I got away from it a little bit, but I hope the answer was somewhere in there.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for maybe one or two more. Here's a question from a faculty member. How important to you is approachability or accessibility of meaning and interpretation? Do you wish your readership works hard to elucidate the poem, to understand the poem? What's your take on that?
That's a good question. That I think I'm still wrestling with, but I will say, at first, I really enjoyed my own poems to be a little riddling at first. I love the idea of like having to like work to understand a poem or work to understand what this like image is doing, what this metaphor means. Like I feel like I was like in love with that aspect of poetry. And in some ways I still am. Like I still love the idea of like, what is this poem trying to say to me? 'Cause I think that's just part of art, right? To like to wrestle with it and to like, analyze it and dig into it. It wasn't until I got with my boyfriend and I was reading him a poem. He was like, "What does this mean?" And I was like, interesting, because this poem is about you. So I feel like now, like if I'm writing poems toward a certain audience, I feel like I do want them to understand what the poem is saying. I still want to have, some of that work with me type of like aspect or like that, accessibility that's the ability to like, what does this mean? But I do think I am now at a point where I'm like, I do want people who aren't in this world of poetry and literature to get the poem in some way. Whether that's, emotionally, whether that's very, exact. And so again, it doesn't mean again that I don't have aspects of like, okay, poets are gonna get this because they're poets, right? Like you still write, I still write towards poets because poets are the one receiving my work most of the time. But however, I do now have an inkling to be a little more accessible. Accessible doesn't mean simple. It doesn't mean not complex. It doesn't mean pared down language, right? 'Cause I think Lucille Clifton is very, very accessible, but and also super complex in her work, right? And so I think I want to use language in a way that people can understand it, but it still offers complexity. Um, and it just means, switching it up a little bit. Maybe, maybe I don't, Google the word blue and find a new word for blue. Maybe I choose the word blue, right? 'Cause people can get blue, right? But sometimes I might want to, Google and be like, you know what? I'm going to use, I don't know, teal or something that people don't really recognize, offhand, right? But I do think accessibility does matter based on the poet and based on the poem. I think it changes depending, right? There are poems in the book where I think this is strictly for poets, probably, but it's still necessary for the book.
That makes perfect sense. Absolutely. There are more questions, but we're coming up to time here, and I do want to extend some final thanks. Certainly, most of all, Luther, to you for joining us, for sharing your work, your words, and I want to thank also Emily for interpreting for us today. I want to thank Nadra Habouche and the Africana Studies program for proposing and sponsoring this event and for the other partners in sponsorship. We thank you all, audience, for being with us, and I hope that you will join us again next week for Dan Ardia and the 2022 Darwin Day Lecture. But once again, so much thank you to Luther. Wish you all the best in your writing. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.